Welcome to the Emerging Lawyer series at the Coffee Conversation Show, powered by the Emerging India Forum, TIF, and our tech partner, Prime Infotech Solution. Theme is the legal architect of JioAds JioGames. We have with us Karanvir Singh Gill, Head Legal Geo Platforms Limited. With a career spanning top law firms and in-house leadership roles at Geo Platforms, Network 18, Karanvir brings a wealth of experience in M&A, joint ventures, venture capital investments, regulatory compliance, and litigation management. His expertise lies at the intersection of law, business strategy, and innovation, making him a key player in shaping the legal frameworks for media and tech driven enterprises. Join us as we discuss the evolution of corporate law, the role of legal leadership in fast growing industries, and the skills young lawyers need to thrive in this space, and his personal journey, which will be an exciting one to uncover. So, welcome, Karanveer, to today's coffee
Thank you.
conversation.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So, let me explain you the flow. There are three rounds: personal journey, professional journey round, personal journey round, and a surprise rapid fire round,
All
for
right.
which you have to be witty,
All
fun,
right.
and quick. And
Let's
here's
hope
your
so.
gift, Legal AI 101. It's a new
Got
book
it.
which I've got, and I know you will crack it, and it will be autographed and sent to you, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, friends, I'm Lion Amir Virani, host at Coffee Conversation and legal tech evangelist at Prime Infotech Solution. We help law firms, corporate legal startups, SMEs with world-class technology, software licensing, and tech training solutions. So, my first question, Karanveer, what inspired you to pursue a career in law? And did you always see yourself in corporate law?
I'll be honest. I wanted to be a fighter pilot. Right. So I'm a
Wow.
I'm a Fauji kid, and I was naturally drawn to the forces. Okay.
Mhm.
However, my eyesight decided to play spoil sport. So I had no choice but to consider an alternate career. John Lennon said it best, right? Life is what happens while you're busy making other plans. That, in my case, couldn't be truer, right? So law wasn't really on the agenda for me, but I'd watched enough courtroom dramas like we all do, to be intrigued by law. What intrigued me the most, and still does to a large extent, is that law, as we know, right, influences almost every part of life. I didn't start out knowing I'd go into corporate law, but once I got a taste of it, seeing how deals come together, how businesses are advised, and how strategy plays such a large role, I was hooked. Right, it felt like the perfect mix of legal reasoning and real world impact. So that's how I got into law.
Wow. So, Karanveer, mergers and acquisition play a crucial role in corporate expansion. What are the key legal risk companies should be aware of in M&A deals?
So look, M&A deals as they're exciting, right? There's also a legal minefield that needs to be negotiated. One big issue that I see is due diligence, right? Now, if it's rushed or incomplete, you might inherit lawsuits, compliance failures, tax issues that you didn't bargain for, right? Regulatory clearances are another major hurdle. Whether it's CCI or SEBI, not getting timely clear approvals, that can kind of hold up, delay, or kill the deal altogether, right? That's not to say that the regulators aren't doing a great job. I think they are, right? SEBI, CCI, RBI, fabulous regulators. They've really come off age, mature regulators, and probably at par with any regulator globally, right? There's also the matter of existing contracts, right? So you have, for example, you might have change of control provisions, okay, that trigger during a merger or an acquisition, right? Uh, and if that's not handled carefully, you risk losing valuable strategic relationships, on day one, right? And then I think one of the largest things that a lot of people ignore is not really doesn't have very much to do with law as such, right? Is the people, right? Employees come with their own set of their own DNA, right? Labor law compliances, transfer of employees, cultural mismatch, right? Now these can be serious disruptions, right? Post closure. Um, and I think, look, finally, I think the contracts themselves. You know, we need to be very careful when you're drafting, things like representations, warranties, indemnities. Okay, because it can get pretty messy after if they're not carefully structured and carefully drafted. They can, things can get messy once the deal closes, right? So you don't want to inherit any of those issues. So really about risk apportionment, right? And I think my advice to anyone who's doing this right is that look, hire the right professionals for the right job. Okay, don't skimp on cost because you bring on board uh, people who know their field, people who know their job. They'll always try and do the right thing, right? They'll always try and be good, they'll always try and minimize risk for you. So yeah, that's
Wow. So let's dive deep into conversation. Current IPOs and venture capital investments require deep regulatory knowledge. What are some crucial compliance aspects that companies
yeah.
often overlook?
So look, IPOs are see a lot of companies, especially startups. Okay, I think get caught off guard during an IPO or VC funding because they focused on growth, right? They haven't really focused on cleaning up the legal house, as you will. I think one thing that trips them up is old non-compliances, right? Missing board minutes, messy cap tables, failure to register IP, right? Non-payment of stamp duty on contracts. Right? These things may seem small, but when the time comes, they get flagged, right? They can not just delay things. They can a deal can kind of fall flat. I mean, classic example of this was the Sony and Z merger, right? There were so many issues there that I think parties thought it's probably best to part ways than to continue down the road, right? Then of course there are the FDI regulations, right? These need specialist knowledge. Minor slip on a FEMA filing can lead to tremendous issues later. Um, Data protection, for example, is another blind spot, right? Especially for tech companies. Investors and regulators are paying a lot more attention to how data is handled, right? We there's a lot of conversation going around data privacy. As we are all aware, there's a new law that's uh, bound to take effect sooner or later, right? And then finally, I think old shareholders agreements, right? Those can be pretty messy, right? Especially if the founders are on less than cordial terms with each other, those issues can fixing that can be quite a nightmare. So I think look, in any IPO, any venture capital sort of a deal, right? I think it's really critical that you know what you're doing. Okay, I think it's spend a little time, think about the fact that you know compliance is not just a thing, right? It's very very real, right? And it can come and become nightmarish for you later, right? I mean, we're all seeing what's happening, and we're all reading the newspapers, and a startup, and I won't name who, but there's a corporate governance failure there. So you don't want things like that happening. Do it right. That's what I always tell people.
Wow. How do you
Yeah.
balance legal risk management with business objectives when advising leadership teams?
So look, it's a balancing act. I try to stay plugged into the business side, all right? What leadership team is aiming for, what the timelines are, right, and what's at stake. Once you get a sense of that, it's easier to tailor legal advice. That's not just safe, but also practical, right? Because again, practicality plays a very very crucial role. I don't believe in saying no by default. Instead, I focus on how can you do this safely. Sometimes that means finding workarounds. Sometimes it means flagging serious risk. But either way, I mean, the goal is to help business move forward. Right? As in-house counsel, we are, I see myself as a business enabler. Right? I don't see myself as a roadblock. But that said, right, there is always a it's not always a yes. As a professional, you should always have the conviction and the grit to turn around and say no where you can't see a way to balance risk and reward. Right. So that's how I deal with it.
Wow. So, Karan, according to you, what are the key elements for having a good relationship with the stakeholders?
Look, I think it's about what so when you talk about stakeholders, right? I mean, I think our constituent stakeholders are our business, right? We are business enablers, like I said earlier. I think it's very critical to understand what drives them, what is it that what is it that they're looking to achieve, right? And then again ties in with what I said previously, right? I think it's important that you understand risk versus reward. Try and do this as safely and as possibly as safely as possible, keeping in mind the business objectives and the legal risk involved, right? I think where teams trip up, right, is that a lot of people turn around and say no upfront, right? There's a key differentiator, right? So you don't say no, you say look, let me come back to you, right? Let me figure it out, right? And it's as long as you're willing to figure it out, I think the stakeholders can get managed fairly relatively easily.
Wow. So, Karan, according to you, what are the biggest legal challenges in the media and tech sectors today?
Okay. um, so the legal landscape, the media and tech landscape is evolving very rapidly, right? Keeping up is half the battle. One major issue, and you've probably heard this, is regulatory uncertainty, right? I think a lot of people say this, right? That there's a lot of regulatory uncertainty, and to a large extent, you can't blame the regulators, you can't blame SEMA, because look, regulation will always follow innovation, right? For example, streaming platforms, they didn't exist till a decade and a half ago, right? When we started seeing that, right? When we started seeing that, oh, streaming platform laws don't apply, right? So what we, in fact, at Network 18, we led the charge on this with IMAI. Okay, we came up with that curated content media ethics, media code, right? Where we said that look, we will self-regulate. Okay, what is it the government is looking to regulate? Let's try and self-regulate, similar to what NBSA is for news broadcasters, right? Or IBDF is for GECs, right? Um, so we wanted to do that, but look, um, rules around data privacy, digital content, IT compliance, they keep changing, right? And you don't often have enough clarity all the time to adjust, right? So playing catch up is a large part of it. For example, take the new data protection law. Right, it's a great step. DPDP is a great step, but there are still a lot of questions around how it will work in real life. Especially when it comes to things like appointing a consent manager. For that, your systems will have to integrate. What if there's always a degree of risk? When you're integrating systems, you're a tech evangelist, so you understand this better than most. That when you integrate systems, there is always an inherent risk that comes in, right? There'll always be a backdoor, malware, ransomware attacks, and things like that, right? So, and look, we are a telecom. We at the essence of it, we are a telco, right? So, our license conditions require us to ensure customer confidentiality, right? So now, if there's a consent manager who suffers a data breach, right, and through that, there's a breach of the telcos involved, right? You can just imagine how challenging that will be, right? We have
Hmm.
480 odd million subscribers, active subscribers. Okay, so just imagine the amount of data, right? The
Hmm.
US has a population of 300 odd million. So this is 180 million more people than all of the US population. And the other thing, Anna, is that look, we've all been using the internet since the turn of the century, right? Do you know where all you've gone, given your data, right? You don't, right? So you don't know who's targeting who, where that data has gone, where it's eventually sitting. Is it sitting in India? Is it sitting outside? on some servers sitting in the dark web. So look, I mean, I think all of these things, the law definitely is a step in the right direction, right? It is needed. But I think, look, I guess the law will evolve. And we'll obviously see, how things get played out in practical terms. Then, if you look at the media content regulations, right, that's a huge topic. OTT platforms and digital news outlets are facing, tighter scrutiny, right? There's a fine line between moderating harmful content and protecting free speech, right? So that's another area of challenge. Then the challenge of IP protection, right? Piracy and unauthorized use of digital content are rampant, and legal action tends to be slow. I mean, you'll see your societies will turn around and put up a big screen during IPL, right? Now that's typically not allowed, right? Because that's public exhibition. So no one has gone and taken the right from the need from the rights holders. In this case, us. So those things tend to be challenging. Then you have AI, right, and emerging tech. Laws are still catching up, right? There's a lot of gray area on how algorithms and data are used. So look, I mean, it's interesting times. I think the world has really changed. I think we are living in a lot of gray. Things aren't as black and white as one would want them to be. Yeah, you try and kind of try and make the most of it, and you try and figure out how best to solve it.
Beautiful. So, Karanveen, who has been a mentor or has influenced you from the corporate legal world?
Uh, so look, I've had the good fortune of working with some very people who are really solid in their field, right? I think um, I'd say Shipra, who's my ex boss, who was my general counsel, who I reported to at Network 80. She and I still work. We work very closely on the Disney deal. Bharat Anand, who's a partner at Khaitan. Again, a very solid professional, great mentor, taught me a lot. Um, Zia Modi, right? I had the good fortune of working with. Again, solid professionals, right? And along the way, right? I think you just need to keep your ears and eyes open. Along the way, you pick up these little snippets, right, on how best to apply these to your professional life. Little things, right? Like I remember Bharat telling me once that when you draft something, okay, read it, read the clause, 2 3 times, okay, to see if it's making sense to somebody who doesn't have the context, right? Will it make some sense to someone who doesn't have the because when we draft, we tend to see we understand it, so we put pen to paper and we say, "Acha, theek hai, ho gaya," right? But somebody who's going to interpret that contract, say 4 or 5 years down the line, won't have that context, right? They're not in the room with you. So is it making sense? Right? So you pick up these little snippets along the way. I remember Jyoti Sagar saying once, right? Saying again, solid professional, great guy. That hey, you know, why do we use legalese, right? For example, inter alia, right, means amongst others. Okay, why can't you just say amongst other things? Why do you need to use inter alia? Why do you use legal maxims, right? Keep it simple, right? Don't try and complicate everything. I see this a lot. Young lawyers, especially, right? My advice whenever I'm in a mentor sort of a role is that look, keep it as simple and straightforward as possible, right? You can't legislate for every case scenario, right? And the more you try and legislate, the more complicated it's going to become. Eventually, it becomes so cumbersome that it's very difficult for anyone to really make sense of what you've written because they don't have the context. Right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Wow, beautifully said. So, Karan, you have worked in both traditional and digital first companies. How does the role of a legal professional shift between these industries?
So I'll say this to you that it's not really a you know. I both Network 18 and Geo are really digital first, right? The amount of tech that Network 18, because it's a broadcast company, um, the amount of tech that goes in is 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 anything, right? But I think in to my mind, right? Uh, I'm having never worked there, mind you, with that very strong caveat. But I think a more traditional setups are more structured, right? They're less risk averse, right? They tend to be less agile, right? So if you're doing commercial contracting, you'll end up doing commercial contracting. That's the role you've been hired for. That's what you'll end up doing, right? Um, but in the more newer age companies, right? Digital first, as you if you will, um, you know, teams have gotten a lot leaner and more agile, right? Your in-house counsel are typically not viewed with the same lens they were, uh, 10, 15 years ago, right? Law firm lawyers and, guilty of guilty of that thought process as well, tend to view it or tended to view in-house counsel as, array, they're just outsourcing legal work to firms. That's not the case. Yeah. Nothing can be truer, nothing can be further from the truth, right? Um, Look, you work in a very high speed environment, right? They're constantly moving goalposts. Okay, business innovation is happening so fast that you really have to keep pace. Okay, constantly be on your feet and think on your feet, right? Um, Look, you need to help shape policies. You need to strike a balance between compliance and business agility. You're not just a final checker, right? You're in the room from the beginning, helping build things the right way. Okay. The legal teams now have tended to go from being goalkeepers to more as strategic advisors, right? They're no longer just gatekeepers. So that's how I would categorize it. Right? I think the role of an in-house lawyer has changed dramatically in the last decade and a half. It's we're specialists in what we do. We understand the business needs, right? We try and give practical, real world advice. Things that'll help. And like I said, right, you say no when you have to say no. Right? You can't. But yeah, that's.
Wow. So, Karan, what's one legal innovation or trend that excites you about the future of corporate law?
AI, right? I think if you see, right, I think we've all been using, at the turn of the century, right? When I joined law school, um, back in '01, Manupatra was still fairly new, right? There was still a lot of kinks that were being ironed out, being figured. But it had the potential, and it did eventually change the way we work. You know, you can just do a keyword search, you'll get everything, you'll get all the case law, you'll get the relevant sections, you'll get all the court decisions, rules, regulations around it. Okay. Um, Traditionally you'd have to go back and, lawyers would have large libraries, right? They had to maintain at significant personal cost. And now you have all you need is a computer terminal to do this, right? And you're again seeing that, and then of course, right, you're familiar with this, right? Delta View, which eventually became Workshare, um, you know, Delta View sold to I think Thomson Reuters, if I'm not mistaken, and then it's now with Litera, right? Again, got sold, and Prime Infotech has been a partner for over a decade. So kudos for that. But you use these things in everyday life, right? And these tools become second nature, and are so important, right? In making the workflow more efficient, right? Imagine a scenario. Of course, Word gives you the same features, but Delta Views, or rather Workshares, is 10 times better and cleaner. But imagine a world where you didn't have this, right? Imagine having to print two documents and compare. You do a word by word comparison, right? How much time that would take, right? AI now has the potential of completely streamlining the process. So your process-driven roles will end up getting more streamlined, right? You can focus more on strategy, on the big ticket things, right? Than the mundane. I would remember, Lion, we'd do M&A deals, right? You'd have the principals and you have the bankers and you'd have the lawyers sitting in the same room, and you'd finish a day's discussion, right? And at the end of that day, when the principals went home and the bankers went home, then like, when can we have the turn of the draft, right? Tomorrow morning, guys, works, right? And no one in the right frame of mind, as young professionals, you'd ever turn around, dare say that, hey, look, this is going to take time. So you'd labor the entire night, you'd work, you turn the draft around, have it ready for the next day's discussions. But I think with AI, right, so much of that will change, right? So much of that will become more efficient. Now, if drafting took, say, a week on a large deal or 10 days on a large deal, right? You have the potential of being able to streamline that. Diligence, for large companies would take 15, 20 days, 30 days, a month and a half, 2 months, right? In some cases. I mean, because it really depends on the number of records. Okay. So, for example, on cap marks deals, right, IPOs, because there's a disclosure requirements are getting more and more stringent with each passing year. You can't risk not seeing everything, right? So you ask for, and of course, look, I'm speaking from past experience. I haven't done cap marks in the last 13, 14 odd years, but from what I saw back then was that, there was a mountain of documents that you had to pour through. There were times when line I'd sleep in the data room, right? I'd have my wife come and hand me a change of clothes the next day, right? So, but with AI now, right? Data rooms, there, I don't think there are, unless there are severe data privacy concerns or confidentiality concerns, they tend to be more, they tend to be virtual data rooms now, right? And with Adobe having introduced AI into the Acrobat Reader, you have the ability to now summarize, pick up key points, right? And it just becomes so much. The processes become so much more streamlined, right? So what would take you, I guess, a month could probably get done in a week. And again, look, I mean, we'll wait and see how this pans out and how eventually, what shape it takes. But you know, technology is only going to expand, right? I don't think we'll ever live in a world where we'll see technology contracting in its scope. Right? So yeah, I mean, it's exciting times, right? And AI, I think, has the ability to completely change the game.
Wow. So let's go to next round, Karan, and understand you as a person. Tell us about your family and your formative years.
Sure thing. So I'm the elder of two siblings. I have a younger brother who's also a lawyer, incidentally. Lan. He works with Dell and has been for several years now. As I mentioned earlier, right at the start of our conversation, I'm a Fauji kid, so I've grown up all over, literally changing schools every couple of years. Taught me to adapt quickly, connect with people, from all walks of life, stay grounded, no matter where I was. My parents always, so this is I'm sorry, I think out of my great grandfather was in the army, my grandfather was in the army, my dad was in the army, right? I'm probably the only outlier, right? My brother and I are the only outliers, right? So all three generations was the forces, right? And I think my folks really emphasize resilience, integrity, above everything else, right? Do the right thing. There is a cost to doing the right thing, but look, you can at least you end up walking with your head held high, right? And that sense of integrity has stayed with me my entire life, right? And that's what I've brought to every place I've worked. You will make mistakes, you will uh, you know things will get challenging, but do the right thing, right? um, Exposure to diverse cultures, right? Having traveled and grown up all over the countryside, to people perspectives, also helps build empathy, right? Something I value very deeply. Uh, you know, well, I mean, I guess every team member turn around and say my boss is great. But look, I genuinely try and be as empathetic to the people I work with as I possibly can. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you for leading me to the next question. You have lived, traveled all over India. Which is your favorite city and why?
Oh, that's a tough one. I really liked Srinagar. I was a tiny kid. Really liked a place called I won't say there's a favorite city. My parents are settled in Chandigarh. So I like it. Um, but I won't say it's probably my favorite. I think if I were to put a put a put a finger to it, I think uh, it'll have to be Srinagar, right? I just absolutely love the place. It's beautiful. Wellington's another place, right? It's just outside Kunur in the Nilgiris. Army, Air Force, and Navy have their staff college there. Again, a beautiful place. Very very pretty part of the world. So yeah, having
Wow.
grown up and lived everywhere, I think.
I can understand. So, what's one hobby or creative pursuit that helps you to recharge?
I have so I try and keep myself as busy as I can when I'm not working. I have several creative pursuits. Reading, photography is one, but what gives me the most joy is riding. So I ride motorcycles, and that's been, I think, probably the single greatest joy, right? And again, look, I mean, this is as far as hobbies go, right? I mean, I have three boys who are extremely uh, at a very interesting stage in their lives. Keep things interesting and real, and yes, definitely helps you stay grounded and recharge. Uh,
Wow.
Lawyers' jobs can be stressful, so yeah.
Yeah. So, what's one book or movie that has influenced you personally, professionally, and what were the key learnings?
Um, Look, I think there's a book called Roses in December, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, that was a biography that was written by it's MC Chagla's biography. Right? He was the first Indian Chief Justice of the Bombay High Court. It gives you a fairly good insight, right, of how things were, where and how things have evolved. It's a great book. Another great book, I think, that every lawyer should read is thinking like a lawyer. An introduction to legal reasoning. It's by a guy called Frederick Schauer. Very interesting, right? I think it teaches you how lawyers think differently, how they interpret stuff. And I think it's a book that can be read at any stage of your, whether you're a law student or you're a young lawyer, or you're a seasoned professional. Always there's always scope for uh, for changing the way you think, for improving the way you think. You know.
Wow, beautiful. So, Karan, suppose you had 1 week away from your corporate legal, away from gadgets. What would you like to do and why?
I would love to take my motorcycle into the hills, man. No questions, right? Um, but of course, and when I do tend to go on these motorcycle tours, my family follows in the car. Um, so yeah, so then I never far away, and it's about the journey. It's not about the destination. But yeah, I mean, that's probably the way I'd de-stress and get away.
Beautiful. Okay. Uh, so, what are your plans for 2025, personally and professionally?
Well, personally, I think I'd like to get a lot more rides in this year. Last 2 years have been a little slow, for various reasons. But yeah, I try and do a lot more in terms of riding. And as far as my professional goals go, I think uh, I need to learn a lot more about AI so that I can introduce that in my daily workflow and use it more efficiently, right? To make my workflow more efficient. That's yeah. So I guess that's what 2025 looks like. I hadn't thought about it
Wow,
till now, but thank you for for that.
beautiful. So my last one is a googly one. Describe Karanveer in one line.
Ah, that's a that's a tough one. But if I were to define myself in a line, it would be a thoughtful, driven legal professional with a genuine passion for making a meaningful impact. Right? I think, look, I mean, we're all here for. Sorry, I don't mean to get all philosophical on you, but on a Friday afternoon. But look, we're all here, right? And unless we can make a meaningful impact with our lives, right? What really are we doing? What is it that we're going to be remembered by? You know. So yeah,
Wow. So let's go to the next round and have some fun. The rapid
perfect.
fire round. Your go-to comfort food.
Pizza,
Your favorite color.
blue,
Wow. And best Punjabi cuisine.
butter chicken. Not Punjabi, but yeah, I'll say it's Punjabi for now. Yeah.
Okay. Favorite business or legal leader?
Business leader, I think would have to be Mukesh Ambani. Legal leader would have to be Zia. Yeah, hands down, fabulous professionals, both
Wow.
in their individual spheres.
The best negotiation tip in one sentence.
Hang in there. Don't give up. Try and make as much sense as you possibly can. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Yeah, that's it.
One word to describe your legal journey.
Interesting.
Hmm. Success in one word.
Um, Resilience.
Wow. Tea or coffee to recharge.
Tea. I'm a tea drinker. Sorry, Lion, I know we're having coffee, but yes,
It's
but
fine.
tea is it for me.
It's fine. We Indians like tea is the first beverage preference, but you did
That's a
well.
legacy.
And yes, and here's a gift which will be
Thank you so
delivered.
much. Thank
So
you.
happy Easter to all our viewers out there in advance. And it was a lovely conversation. I like the one line. It's all about the journey and not the destination. So all those young legal professionals who wants to go in-house for media company, this is episode where Karan will take you to his journey, how media is exciting, but it is you have to be alert. Every sentence counts. So, like this, there are 400 plus coffee speakers who bring to the table their interesting journeys. And if you want to be featured, like Karanveer, visit our LinkedIn page or a company, the Emerging India Forum, or get one of the coffee speakers like Karan to refer you, and we could have coffee conversations. Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. Cheers, Lion. Thank you for having me. I'm sorry it's taken us this much time to get me here, but glad we could squeeze this in today.